In this lesson, we're going to be looking at the Haitian Revolution from 1791 to 1804. Now, as previously mentioned, the Haitian Revolution in the Southern Americas was brought on very much by the revolution in the north with the USA and also by the French Revolution. Okay, so the Haitian Revolution certainly brought forth ideas of racial equality that proved very threatening to the rest of the Americas, especially to those regions that relied or depended on slave labor. Remember, slavery is one of the key economic factors for these regions. They made a huge amount of money out of slaves. Despicable as it was, in terms of the economy of these areas, it was hugely beneficial to them. Now, the revolution took place on the island of Haiti in San Domingo, down here. So this is where the revolution in its first instance took place. This is where it started off. And it's the eastern part of the island of what was known as Hispaniola. This island was very, very important to France, primarily because of the sugar. Now, France exported a large amount of sugar. In fact, it provided 2/5 of its overseas trade. So sugar accounted for 2/5 of France's overseas trade, and it came from mainly this island. So the island was very important. The commodity of sugar was incredibly important for it because of the money it made. Now, the island also had a plantation economy. Now, if we look over here, this is a picture of a typical plantation. A plantation, if you didn't know, in these days was typically like a farm. But the people that worked on the farm were slaves, so it was free trade. And they would work for anything that was valuable in terms of commodity. So in this instance, in the picture, it's cotton, but it could easily be sugar or any other kind of item or commodity that was valuable at the time. So you have the issue of slaves. Slaves were free, and we know that the trade that went on, we know about that. But in this case, having slaves working on the plantations to create or to be able to get the sugar that France could then sell and make 2/5 of their trade was economically a significant factor. So this reliance on slaves allowed the production of sugar to stay high. Now, before the revolution took place, and we're going to go up to San Domingo, the island was divided on 3 different levels. It was divided by race, it was divided socially, and it was divided legally. So on 3 levels, there were divisions. Okay, so let's have a look at the society at the time. In terms of the most dominant group, you had whites. So the whites were the dominant group in society. And they were nearly the smallest group in society, but we've come to know that would be typical in this time. And they made up 40,000 people. Now, within this group, there were divisions. Now, this is a very crude example, but it's just for illustration purposes. You'd have the upper, middle, lower classes. So the whites were divided by class. So you'd have a hierarchy there. So you'd have very rich at the top, followed by less rich, and poor at the bottom. So the whites, although they were the dominant class, they were still divided. The next group we're going to look at in this little diagram were the non-whites. Now, what's important about these is that although they are non-white, they are free. So they're free men and women. And these made up for 30,000. So they're the smallest group in society. Non-whites, but they're 3, and they make up 30,000. And again, these were divided. These are massively divided in terms of who they were, in terms of their social, how they felt socially, what they worked for, who they worked for, how much money they made. So these were also divided. So at the moment, you've got a big picture of social division, economic division, legal division, what they're entitled to, what they weren't allowed to. You have whites, which dominated the island. You had non-whites who are free, but often were also socially divided. And then we're going to look at, before we do that, the name for these non-whites, and this is important because we'll be referring to it throughout this lesson, were gens de couleur. Okay, and this is the name, excuse my French, but these are the name for this group in society. Now, the overwhelming majority in this group, and this made up 500,000, were slaves. So the largest group on the island, the hugest number, were slaves. While this might seem like a homogeneous group, ethnically, they were very diverse too. And the rights they had and the privileges they got depended which plantation they were on. So some plantations they might have had, they might be able to work and earn some money from it. In some plantations they may have got more food or better housing conditions. So their rights and what they got were very much dependent on where they were working. So as I said, some were even granted the right to farm their own land and sell their produce. So that would be a better situation. But we have on this island, I hope you can see here, this huge mix, and it's a dangerous mix. You have a white group, and there's going to be upset amongst that group because you've got different classes, you've got different people wanting more things, you've got people with power, people without it. Then you have the non-whites who are free, and there's 30,000 of them, but they're also divided on a huge number of levels. And then the overwhelming majority are slaves who clearly aren't going to be happy, but they also have different privileges or they have different standings in society. So no one really knows where they are on the island. And the real danger is that the people that are going to be most unhappy is the largest number. So if there was ever going to be a point where there was going to be a fight to happen, they have the largest number. Now in 1789, just going to put some context to this, we had the French Revolution. Okay, we know about the French Revolution, you don't need to know a huge amount about it, but you need to know that it existed. And it provided the catalyst for change in the colony, in Haiti. The whites were divided, as we said, as the wealthy. So we're now going to call these guys the Grands Blancs. Now these are the wealthy whites. Remember we said in the last slide about how the whites were divided. Now the wealthy were called the Grands Blancs. They tried to ensure continued dominance for themselves. But the middle and lower classes, and we're going to call these the Petits Blancs, felt it was their right to rule. So this middle-lower group, as in the French Revolution, felt it was their right to rule, and they formed a national guard to take action. The gens de couleur, now these were, if you remember from the previous slide, these were the free non-whites, saw the revolution as their opportunity for equal rights. So we've got this mass now of unhappy people. You have the Petits Blancs, who feel that they should be taking control. So within the white group, you've got a power struggle going on. And then on the outskirts of this, you can see the gens de couleur, the free non-whites, seeing an opportunity for them to gain power. And in 1790, the National Assembly in France granted the gens de couleur political rights. Now the whites, clearly upset by this, were determined to prevent the implementation of this through their own organisation and the development of a colonial assembly. Thus in 1791, when members of the gens de couleur organised an armed demonstration to demand that their rights be granted, the leaders were seized and executed by the colonial government. Now we've got problems. As soon as people are executed and killed, it stirs up violence. Soon thereafter, the colony faced a series of revolts and riots across racial and class lines. In August 1791, the slaves on the northern part of the island, up here, the slaves on this northern part of the island revolted. By November, nearly half of the slaves were in revolt, with the goal of ridding the colony of slavery and its white population. They attacked and destroyed the plantations and any whites they encountered. Slaves who remained loyal to their masters faced a similar fate and were executed. The slave revolt eclipsed the conflicts between the whites and the gens de couleur. Remember the huge number of slaves there are. Of course it's going to eclipse it. There's 500,000 of them. The whites became equally barbarous, and in their treatment of slaves, they became brutal. And in doing this, in their horrible treatment of the slaves, their brutality, they actually managed to maintain control of the towns, but not for long. The slaves developed and perfected their use of guerrilla warfare. Now, if you remember the importance of guerrilla warfare in the American Wars for Independence, you can see how important it becomes again now. So now we have this bubbling tension pot that's happening in this island. Now, a French attempt to restore order through enforcing the rights of the gens de couleur met with failure. In 1792, 6,000 French troops were dispatched to San Domingo to enforce French law and to impose order on the colony. Instead, the fighting intensified as a number of groups battled against one another in the muddied civil war. In desperation, the French commissioner abolished slavery in 1793. Abolished slavery. Not because it was wrong, but because he was trying to restore order. At this point, a leader of the slaves emerged, and his name was Toussaint Louverture. Again, excuse my French. Toussaint Louverture, this guy here. Leader of the slaves emerged, and he proved to be an incredibly strong leader who managed to organize the slaves into a unit that was going to take control of various parts of the island. A very, very important figure. At this point, I want you to make sure you go away and do some additional research on this man.